All right, the topic for this discussion is there a legitimate place for human genetic enhancement? So we need to say a little bit about a couple things before we make our way to enhancement. First, they point out how something called somatic gene therapy aims only to treat or prevent a disease by isolating within your own body a particular segment of DNA that contains a gene sequence from the somatic cell of just your own organism, and introducing into that particular somatic cell into the genome of a different organism. So this is not trying to affect the offspring of an organism. This is trying to affect the way the body cells function that are not passed on to future generations. However, they point out that while somatic gene therapy affects an individual organism genome, and any effects are restricted to that individual, more importantly, the goal of germline gene therapy is to try to engineer the individual organism's germ cells. So this would be like the sperm cells or the egg cells. And that engineering of the germ cells is done in such a way that the modification gets inherited by the individual's offspring. So it's often called inherited genetic modification, or germline gene therapy, two names for the same thing. However, there's a general ban on this for humans and for any other ape species for lots of reasons, but the main one is listed in a report that they talk about how it's not really possible today to undertake this kind of IGM safely and responsibly. Now, the goal of genetic therapy, as we looked at in the past few slides, is the treatment or prevention of a disease or some sort of disorder or a disability within an organism. In contrast, the goal of genetic enhancement is not so much treating a disease, disorder, or disability, but it's the augmentation or increase or magnification or enhancement of some capability or trait in an organism. It's moving you from normal to better than normal, from healthy to better than healthy. Interestingly, however, one of the reasons it's important to draw the distinction between therapy and enhancement is because there are various cases where this very same procedure is going to be an instance of therapy for one person, but it's going to be an instance of enhancement for another person. So one of the things that they are aware of is that genetic enhancement has sometimes been synonymous with the phrase eugenics. Sir Francis Galton coined this phrase back in 1883. However, the authors are careful to point out, after listing the history of the eugenics movement and some of its ups and downs, that the concept of genetic enhancement, as well as the methods and implementation of enhancement, can be separated from eugenics, especially the science or the pseudoscience of eugenics and the injustices and atrocities that were associated with historical eugenics. Now, the very first author of this section for this part, Nicholas Agar, thinks that genetic enhancement still presents us with two major concerns besides the eugenic concerns, but he thinks that these two concerns could be answered. One of them is that the genetically enhanced haves and the have-nots are going to be in various positions of advantage or disadvantage with respect to one another. And the second concern is that genetically enhancing humans changes the genes of potential future persons without their consent. Finally, the second author in our section is going to argue that Agar's argument is a slippery slope, that even though you try to disentangle genetic enhancement from eugenics, it's not likely to stay that way. It's likely to get meshed back into eugenics. And one of his juicier quotes is that there's no law in any land on Earth that can be invoked to stop the genetic trespass that will begin with cloning the cutest pets and proceed predictably into the mindset of the Nazis. See if that's true or not.